the moment we're all waiting for. At 7 o'clock tonight is a training information type deal, and I'll ask for a roll call, and then I will turn it over to Pat Garrity. He'll announce our guest speakers and kind of the agenda. We even get to go on a field trip, but it's only about 100 feet, so that's not too bad. All right, Pat, if we could have a roll call.
Dan Guthmiller.
Here.
Dan Clemish.
Here.
Steve Piatla. Carl Kretzinger.
Here.
Butch Becker. Don Kettering.
Here.
Gary Citizen. Deborah Bodenstedt.
Here.
Zane Williams. Michael Welsh.
Yes.
Jeff Goodall.
Yes.
Four present. Okay, in repeating what Mike had said, this is an informational for the Planning Commission and for citizens regarding our comprehensive plan and our thought process and our research. And tonight I would like to welcome Natural Resources Conservation Services, and we have a local office in Yankton, in which Ryan is our representative from the local office, and I would like to bring up Ryan to introduce our other officers that are from the Mitchell office, and then they will explain our process that we're going to do for our field trip. Ryan?
Thanks, Pat. I'm Ryan Frickel. I'm the district conservationist here for Yankton County, and I have a couple specialists here with me, and we're going to take you guys outside and show you a little bit of what we do as an agency. We're a branch of the USDA, so I have John Lentz with me here, if you want to just wave your hand. There you go. And Stan Boltz, he's the regional soil health specialist. I forgot to mention that John's the head of the animal nutrient management team here in South Dakota. So with that, turn it back over.
I want to just a little bit about the process that we're doing. Sure. We visited a while earlier, and I'll let John talk about this, why we decided to do the trailer setup outside.
Okay. So one of the things our agency is really big on is trying to work with producers on soil health, because everything basically on an agricultural standpoint is tied back to the health and vitality of our soils, whether we're growing crops or whether we have animal industry or whatever it might be. So we're going to show you a couple little demonstrations. The demonstration outside is called a rainfall simulator, and what it's really going to show you is what different landscape management practices can do as far as preventing runoff, preventing pollution into our streams and lakes. I mean, that's really what the conversation has to come back to is, are we keeping those nutrients that our crops need up on the landscape where they can be used properly, or are they escaping our fields and getting into our waterways? That's what everybody's concerned about, right? Are we keeping the water clean and yet still staying, vitality as far as agriculture? So I think with that, we're going to go outside for about 30 minutes, watch the rainfall simulator. By that time, you'll be good and hot and sweaty. You can come back in here and cool off. I've got a little PowerPoint presentation we'll go through, and then we'll just open it up for some general questions and see if we can answer any questions you might have. So.
Okay, and it's out in the front parking lot or the north side. So if everybody come on out, we'll walk.
No, yeah. Right.
It's only 20 bucks a night.
So your first cutting might account for half of that almost?
No, we cut so early. See, when everybody else is planting beans, we're cutting.
Okay, so it's pretty even.
We don't see blooms in our
Actually, I went also down to Fort Robinson,
You don't
Crazy
believe
Horse
nothing
was killed.
We don't try to. But usually once during the year, we try to let every field bloom.
Okay, very good. John, we'll go ahead and take some questions here. We'll just kind of complete that question piece. The gentleman over here in the white plaid shirt there, he's standing up right now talking to Dan. Did you want to complete your question, sir? Do you want to complete your question? You had one? Yes, you had one out there?
Yeah.
For Dan?
On the no-till soil, is there a recycling there for nutrients with the living
Right, so the more,
in the soil?
typically the more, life you have in your soil, the more microfauna and macrofauna that's in there. Things tend to cycle faster. That's why, like Stan mentioned, if you just try to get no-till going with just one of those parameters, it takes a lot longer. You basically have to get your soil up to steam, so to speak, get the furnace stoked. And then once it's up and running, nutrients cycle very quickly, residue cycle very quickly, and it's alive. It's functioning like a living organism.
So it actually would go a long way to reducing nitrogen
really helps. Okay, just one quick, I'm gonna pass this out before we get going here. And I told you outside that I have some really good websites on the back of this. The first page kind of talks about the team I work on, the Ag Nutrient Management team. We basically, work all across South Dakota helping producers on a voluntary basis. And this is important to understand. I think, did you guys hear from DENR last week?
Yeah.
So remember, DENR, that is the regulatory arm of the state of South Dakota. So they, basically, anybody that's over 1,000 animal units, it's a CAFO operation, they're required to have a permit. NRCS is strictly voluntary. We don't come out to a producer's place unless they ask us for help. And a lot of producers do. That's what you need to be aware of, is many producers in South Dakota are really trying to do the right thing. And so when they call us up and they go out to their operation, they're asking for help to try to solve a resource concern. That's what we try to do. So, that being said, this page talks a little bit about what AFOs and CAFOs are, kind of what our team does, and then on the back again of those websites. If you want to spend some time researching nutrients, manure, water quality, permitting, whatever it might be, if you dig through these websites, you will find about anything you're ever looking for. So, that being said, okay, yes sir.
Okay, according to the CDC, there's a lot of pathogens and toxins in hog manure. Bacteria, viruses, and whatnot. And it's particularly a hazard in the particulate matter in the dust that is emitted from the either through the open sides of the barn or blowing out of the trucks that are hauling hogs. Likewise, I think there'll be some dangers from particulate matter once the manure on the soil is dry. And I think a lot of people aren't concerned about this. They don't think the particulate matter is an issue because they live 8 or 10 miles away. But I remember maybe 12, 15 years ago here in Yankton when our snow turned pink because of dust or particulate matter blown up from the red soil in Oklahoma. So what I want to know is, how hazardous is this particulate matter? Because it's something, you get within a couple miles of a CAFO and you can smell it because of the volatile organics that aren't helpful at all. But once you get away, you can't smell or taste the particulate matter. So you don't know if you're being exposed to it. I mean, it can land on your garden, it can land in Aunt Jenny's potato salad at your backyard picnic. So how much of a disease threat or hazard is there in the particulate matter?
Well, I don't want to defer your question, but honestly, the pathogen side of things, the air quality issue, I'm probably not the right person to speak to that. It's not my field of expertise. I do know from looking through some of these sites, there's some really good information. Dr. Aaron Cordes with SDSU has done a lot of work on air quality coming out of confinement barns. I would really try to look up some of her research and see what she has to say. I'm afraid I just couldn't speak to your topic with much intelligence, so I'm going to bypass that one. I think, yes sir.
I guess I got a question. When you're helping producers out to do their manure management plan, are there specific areas or soil types you try to avoid for manure application? Like wetlands,
Right.
areas close to rivers and streams,
Yep.
over shallow aquifers,
You bet.
things like that? Could
Absolutely,
you
yep.
address that?
So what we look at when you write a nutrient management plan, we're looking at 3 sets of rules. So number one, if they're working within NRCS, they have to follow what's called our 590 standard, or nutrient management standard. And that's available on our website if anyone wants to look that up. That has some certain setbacks from, I get what we call conveyances, drainage ditches, waterways,
How
streams,
far are
creeks.
they?
We typically require them to stay 100 feet back from any conveyances. And then the second set of rules we would look at would be any county zoning rules. So the counties have the right to set their own setbacks, whatever they might be. So we always try to look at those next. And then the third one would be if they are getting permitted through the state of South Dakota, DENR, we would look at the state's regulation as well. So it gets a little intense. We have to actually look at sometimes at 3 different locations to make sure we're getting all those setbacks in place.
What about like winter applications? I know
Yep.
that's not a preferred method, but it does happen sometimes. If a producer calls you and say, hey, I need to empty how do you help them do that?
Sure, sure. So the winter application rules for NRCS are we do not allow any application on floodplain soils. You have to be 300 feet back instead of 100 feet back from a conveyance. You have to be 1,000 feet back from any named water body. So Big Sioux River, Missouri River, you have to be 1,000 feet back from that. And you cannot apply on any soils that are more than 4% slope. So anything that's very steep, has a real high risk of runoff, we would stay off of those. So when I do maps basically and show the producers the areas that are eligible to be applied on and not. Let's say I had 1,000 acres that the producer could apply on in spring, summer, and the fall. It is very common when I get done doing the winter application maps, he maybe only has 50 or 100 acres left, almost, because they're very restrictive. They're set up to the point where we're going to make sure if you do apply in the wintertime, there's a very, very small risk of it running off.
So that's only if the producer's going through you though,
Right.
correct?
And again, the state has setback rules. You can look up the state.
If they're permitted.
If they're permitted, they have, a set of rules as well. And again, counties have some of their own, so.
What about over?
What I'd like to do
aquifers?
is go into the presentation so that we can see, his expertise is based on the presentation, and then see what we come up with for questions at the end. And then, I'm guessing around 10 or 15 minutes of questions afterwards.
Mr. Chairman, can he answer the last part of my question over applying manure over shallow aquifers?
We'll
Yeah.
allow them to answer the one question.
Thank you.
We'll finish
Okay.
that one.
During any time of the year or just,
Well, we have a lot of shallow
Yep.
aquifers in Yankton County
Correct.
where it's less than 50 feet.
Yep.
So I know other counties like Minnehaha have, groundwater protection areas and they don't allow manure application over shallow aquifers. Yankton County doesn't have that protection, but you as an expert, are there things that a producer could do to minimize, groundwater contamination?
so what we do is we identify fields with either being low leaching risk or high leaching risk. And that is based on then, again, the soil's inherent properties. Is it sandy, gravelly soils? And then also looking at aquifer depth. If we have fields that do have a potential high risk for nitrate leaching, then we encourage producers, yes, to, split application of nutrients. Don't put everything on at one time. Maybe put on some nutrients in the spring and then come back and side dress in the summer to try to make sure we're minimizing that risk if we have a big rainfall event of, leaching into the aquifer. So yes, we do address that. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump into my presentation real quick. I'm just going to show you some photos, and this is kind of, again, just piggybacking off some of the things that Stan talked about outside. Good situation or bad situation? Lots of erosion going on. We've got all the classic kinds of erosion: rill erosion, gully erosion, ephemeral erosion. You got it all right there in that one field. Doesn't look so good, does it? Okay, so these are all things that we want to avoid on the landscape. Do we all kind of agree with that? You bet. Be hard for anybody to say we want those things. So a lot of things have been done. This is an example of field windbreaks that are used to protect cropland from wind erosion. Here we've got a couple of things going on. We've got some terraces up on the landscape that are used to protect the soil from eroding. We've got a man-made dam down here at the bottom that's catching any runoff that might come off those fields and keeping it from moving on down the landscape. Here's a nice grass filter strip along a waterway. So I think what I'm just trying to get you to see here is, NRCS has been in business for 75 plus years working with producers. A lot of good things have been done on the landscape. Are there a lot of good things that can still be done? Absolutely. But let's try to keep focused on, what has truly occurred in the past, all the good things that are occurring out there right now, and try to just keep working together. So, but like Stan said, I think soil health really is the key. And the reason soil health is so important because we can not only protect water quality if we're protecting our soils, but we can keep growing food. We all like food, right? I do. You can tell that. Yeah, you bet. So we talked about those three properties: that physical, chemical, and biological. Now there's a picture down in the bottom, and to me that's kind of the ultimate picture. Whenever you go out in your garden, who gardens here? Anybody garden? Lots of gardeners. When you go out and dig in your garden, you find earthworms, is that good or bad?
Good.
Absolutely. That's a great indicator of soil health. That's that biological activity that's going on out there. What do earthworms like to eat? Dirt. But really, they like the organic matter. That's what they're after, right? They're nibbling on that organic matter, passing it through. And so we didn't mention, I'm going to keep making some inferences to manure because that's kind of why you guys called me down here to talk about some of the things, both pro and con for manure. And that is one thing we see time and time again. When we have manure in our cropping systems, the organic matter levels typically, I think one of the gentlemen said that, you know, they were having 6-7% organic matter in their soils because they were using manure, and that's true. There's probably no faster way to build organic matter in a soil than properly using manure. So, okay. So here's my take home for the whole night. If used correctly, manure is good for soil health. It's a great source of nutrients. We've used manure for thousands of years in our cropping systems. You know, so I have the two pictures. I have that could be me when I was a kid. I grew up on a dairy, so I did lots of wheelbarrowing of manure. So that's one way to apply manure. And then you've got down here in the bottom a 20-ton spreader going across the field at 8 miles an hour, GPS tracking. Which one's right, which one's wrong? Is one bad and one good? Are they both bad, both good?
Probably more if he's spreading with the tractor.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have the perception just because it's a little bigger, it's bad. But honestly, the young kid up in the top, dumping it on there like that, he's probably putting on 10 times what he needs. Yeah, I helped calibrate that spreader down the bottom. He's putting on as close as he can with the technology available, the exact amount of nutrients that crop's gonna need. So he's trying to do everything right. GPS tracking, so there's no overlap. That's a vertical beater spreader. It's spreading everything out, just a perfect pattern. So trying to do a good job. We talk a lot about in the industry the 4 R's of nutrient management. That is the right source of nutrients at the right rate, at the right time, in the right place. So this could be a test question if I was in a college class. The 4 R's of nutrient management. And that's what it comes down to. You know, putting it out there at the right time, putting it in the right place. The gentleman asked about buffers and setbacks. That's very important. We don't want to go out and spread right next to the big Sioux River, 2 feet from it, so when a rain comes along, it runs in. We want to make sure we leave a good setback distance, so if there is some runoff, there's a chance to be filtered and buffered out. Crop rotation. Stan mentioned this out in the field. You know, and crop rotations are just important because they help break up those disease pest cycles. By putting some small grain or alfalfa in our rotations, we've increased our window when we can actually go out there and apply manure. If manure is an issue, we don't want to put it all on, you know, after the snow flies, which we don't. By increasing our rotations out, having some small grain. When I work all across South Dakota. I tend to have less problems with producers as we get a little further west because they have a little more wheat in their rotation. They have a little bigger window to apply their manure on. So, not saying corn and beans are bad, but they do give us a little narrower window to work with. Yep. Use tillage sparingly, you know, no-till. Sometimes isn't always an option, but at least try to decrease your tillage as much as possible, again, to protect that soil and keep that life in the soil going. Cover crops. I think this is probably one of the most underutilized tools we have. It's a technology that was around 50 years ago. I can remember my grandpa talking about planting sweet clover and plowing it down to get nutrients back in the soil. We just kind of forgot about it for a few years. It's starting to come back around. Look at all the benefits of cover crops. Increase your organic matter, reduce nitrate loss. If you have a wheat crop and you harvest it in the middle of July and you go out there and put manure on, there is potential that some of that manure could leach. If we put a cover crop out there, we can suck all those nutrients up. It will hold it into biomass until the next year they can be broke down for the crop. It reduces compaction, it feeds those soil organisms, reduces erosion, runoff, and improves soil structure. Here's a picture of a producer that planted rye, cereal rye, after his corn crop. He called me out, I said I'm going to plant, so I thought I'm going to come out and take some pictures. That stuff was about, you know, knee to waist high on me. I said, you're not going to plant with that, no way. Never going to make it happen. Yep. Pulled right in there, he planted right into that standing rye crop. Came back about a week later, sprayed it off with Roundup. I said, this is going to be a disaster. You're done. You're out of business. I might as well buy your farm right now. man, those are the best looking beans in the whole county. They really are. It even amazed me, and I've been in the industry for a long time, but there's something about that. It shaded the ground, kept a little extra moisture. We got really dry in June, part of July, and those beans look fantastic. So a lot of potential there. I think we're just really starting to understand the benefits of cover crops, how to make them work in our rotations, but a lot of producers are starting to embrace this, and I think that's going to help us a bunch when it comes to making sure the nutrients stay where they need to be.
Roundup, really? Roundup. That's not good for anybody. No. But you're talking about a grass crop. No, because it's overall it's a bad thing.
Okay, precision agriculture. Here is going to be, I think, another one of those things that really helps us out. What you're looking at on the right there, that is a, they basically soil sample this field and they set up zones. And the different zones are used to apply different amounts of nutrients because they figured out that across that quarter section, there were areas that had high nutrient concentrations and areas that had low nutrient concentrations. So they're actually going to apply their fertilizer or manure, you can do either one, based on that variable rate map. So we're making sure we're not going to over apply on any part of the field. And that's a technology that's just really, again, starting to get up and running. I think in the next, decade, this is really going to come on strong. Producers are going to use it. So, one of our industry chiefs, our NRCS chiefs, about 15 years ago, one of his sayings I really liked and always stuck with me was he said, "Farm the best, but buffer the rest." And I think that's a good take home. Is let's go ahead and take our good crop ground, use it for what it was intended for. But some of those sensitive areas, those drainage ways, or maybe those areas right along a creek or stream, maybe we could do a little better job by putting those down into a grass buffer of some kind. So again, here's a good example of maybe a gully erosion we don't want to see. And on the right side, there's a nice grass waterway that's protecting the field from runoff. And again, these are all solutions that our agency can work with producers on. We have engineers on staff that can come out and design these things for you. And Ryan's even going to mention a little bit later, there's even some cost share programs available to help producers that would like to implement these practices. Filter strips, kind of like a buffer strip, same thing basically, but here's an example on the top where they're farming right up next to the drainage ditch, and on the bottom there's a nice 150-foot grass buffer strip along that lake. So I think more and more producers are adopting these things. These can really help with nutrient runoff, with sediment runoff, and good public perception as well. Okay, so what if we did everything we could up in the landscape? We're balancing our nutrients, we're using no-till, but we're still getting some nutrients escaping from our field. Is there anything we can do? Well, there are, and I call them field remediation practices. This is an example of one for nitrogen. It's called a bioreactor. And basically, so what we've got there in the green is we're showing that as a crop field. It has some drainage tile in it. And instead of just dumping the drainage tile directly into the creek or lake, we can actually put in one of these denitrifying bioreactors. So I'll show you a real life picture. It's a big hole in the ground with wood chips in it. Pretty scientific. But it works. So what you do basically is you dump your tile line on the upstream side of this, and as the water flows through these wood chips, there's actually bacteria that lives on those wood chips. And the bacteria eats nitrogen. That's how it stays alive. So as the water flows through, if it has nitrates in it, that bacteria gobbles up the nitrates, and then when the water exits and goes into the stream, it's much, much cleaner than it was when it went in the upside. So lots of research again being done on these all across the Midwest. I think another few years we're going to have enough data to be able to start putting these on the landscape and really helping the cause. Okay, this is the short list of conservation practices for reducing phosphorus and nitrogen loss in the landscape. Using the 4 R's, minimizing soil erosion, no-till, terraces, a diverse crop rotation, keep your soil test levels reasonable. One of the ladies outside asked about, how do we manage the amount of manure that goes on? Well, by testing our soil every year, determining what nutrients are in there, how many do we need, not letting those nutrient levels build up to an unreasonable amount. Very common sense. Use cover crops whenever possible. Using buffers, filter strips. Variable rate technology. Like I showed you the map of where they were soil sampling the different parts of the field and applying accordingly. That's called VRT. Use common sense drainage practices. Maybe don't outlet your tile directly into a creek or lake. Give it some filter area. And if you have to, utilize these remediation practices like bioreactors or constructed wetlands. And then other things like urease and nitrification inhibitors. So, long list of things that can be done. You don't use those on every single farm every time. You have to kind of decide what's the resource issues on the farm. Do we need to use these or not? That's part of that whole planning process we go through when we develop nutrient management plans. Like Stan said, I think integration of livestock into our cropping system is really essential for long-term sustainability. A number that got thrown out there a few years ago that I thought was really interesting is phosphorus. Most producers use phosphorus. Gardeners, you probably use it too. Where do we get our current, if you go down to the elevator, where does your phosphorus come from? It's mine, correct. It's mined out of rock.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an infinite supply? Nope, it's not. They actually estimate that within the next 100 years, all the mineable phosphorus in the United States will be gone. You say, big deal, so what? Well, it's a big deal. You know anything about agronomy, you can't grow crops very well without phosphorus. I think long term, we're not gonna have to worry about it, but my great-great-grandkids might have to worry about it. We're gonna really have to start integrating things back together like Grandpa maybe did. Livestock and cropping systems all together, working together. Or else we might not survive as a species. So, just something to chew on. But, I think again, if we can utilize manure correctly, by following some of these conservation principles, it can be a win-win for everyone. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. Okay, that is my spiel.
You have anybody else, John, that wants to
Follow on your presentation.
follow on your presentation, or do you want?
Ryan, do you have anything you want to
I
jump
can
on?
say a few words,
Yep, you bet.
just about kind of like what I would do with a producer. You want to go back to that very first slide again? This is a great photo.
Next one.
No, the next one. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so John Smith walks into my office. This is what he's got going on in this field. You know, he's got resource concerns up the wazoo here, but you know, luckily we can work with him and offer him a few alternatives to treat some of those resource concerns. Geez, we can go with the grass waterway through CRP there, or if he doesn't want to do that, if he wants to maintain that ditch, we could go with a 20 to 30 minimum filter strip on either side of that thing to help filter out some of those sediments that might contain some nutrients. No-till on the whole thing, just to help increase that water infiltration, get that moving into the soil profile instead of running off. Crop rotation, maybe adding some winter wheat in there, cover crop after that. I mean, there's a slug of different conservation practices we could get him talking about, and maybe later even get him into a program. We have EQIP, CRP is a really big one. I'm sure everybody here knows what CRP is. He wouldn't have to offer that whole field. He could just offer 4 to 5 acres. EQIP, I mentioned, you know, we would probably do maybe some terraces through that to help catch some of that runoff, reduce that erosion. We could go no-till through that too. If he wants to offer some more land, we would maybe look at going through the stewardship program to get his whole operation in, if he's sold on that no-till practice. But first, the producer really needs to stop into our office, and then I would meet him out on the field. You know, I have wheels, I'm mobile. So if you guys know anyone, or if you guys are landowners, feel free to stop by. I'd love to visit with you one-on-one. So that's all I had.
Okay, we'll open the floor for questions. I have 5 after 8, so we'll go to 20 after.
Any questions?
Dan?
Look at a question. You talked about like bioreactors for like high nitrates, but what about like manure applications on tiled fields? I know it's kind of a new phenomena, but are there any bioreactors that have showed promise removing like fecal coliform and E. coli and things like that?
To my knowledge, all the research has primarily been focused on the nitrate end of things. I mean, there could be, but I'm not aware of them. If there were on the fecal coliform end.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
This lady out here, she said, well, Roundup isn't good for anybody. You know, you were talking about the sweet clover that your grandfather did. We did it back in the 70s also, and why that went away was because we quit plowing. Because plowing created terrible land erosion. Like it, no, I was talking to the lady behind you.
I know, but I'm just saying,
No,
Roundup causes a lot of things.
Yeah, I know it, but, and this is actually why the cover crop has actually made a comeback, because we can actually kill one product, kill one crop, and go in and make another one survive. And it is a trade-off. I'm not trying to say what's right or what's wrong, but that's the way the industry has evolved. That's,
I know, but there's research that shows that Roundup, and I know everybody uses it, it does cause all sorts of cancer. So you have to look at that too.
I'm not going that to that.
The only thing you can do is follow label directions.
Right,
That's it. You can't go off label.
Okay, next question?
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
What happens to all the antibiotics that are given the animals that get out into their feces and then that's spread on the land? What about that?
I would really again encourage you, those websites, there's just some fantastic research, and again, that's a little bit out of my area of expertise, but I would encourage you to look through, you'd be able to find a lot of information on that very question.
And they also say heavy metals in the foods that they give these confined animals is an issue too with what's spread, what's in the feces that are spread on the land. I mean, because what's in the land is coming into the food.
Yeah, again, I'll defer to that because that's way out of my area of expertise, but there's been some research done on that. Yes, sir.
I just want to thank you. I mean, your presentation was very informative. And I guess in answer to her question about the antibiotic issue, there's actually quantitative research which has actually looked at sediments and rivers above and below certain heavily agricultural areas. And antibiotics are in the rivers, sediments, and so are the bacteria that are using the food. And in surprisingly high concentrations in many instances. So I mean, when they get dispersed into the environment, these things wind up in rivers and streams. Now, one in answer to your question about, or your comment about phosphorus, anybody ever measure the amount of phosphorus in the Mississippi River?
Oh, I'm sure there's some data available. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where it's all going. I
Okay.
mean, there's a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico the size of Connecticut now, maybe smaller with the hurricane. But what happens is that the...
Sir, could you speak a little louder? My hearing is not
Yeah.
the best. Thank you.
In answer to the phosphorus issue about minable phosphorus, for minerals, a lot of it's going down the Mississippi River and winds up in the Gulf of Mexico. And what happens is that the fresh water from the Mississippi layers on top of the salt water, creates an algae growth, which then sinks to the bottom and then creates a anaerobic environment or low oxygen environment in the bottom of the Gulf. And it's all from nutrients that leach out of the Midwest, because both the Ohio and Missouri come together in the Mississippi. I mean, the Mississippi River Basin drains 31 states and a couple of Canadian provinces. It's a huge, huge, huge area, and basically that's where all agriculture in the United States happens, in the drainage basin of the Mississippi River.
Next question?
So I think these measures are extremely useful. I mean, one thing that would be interesting to know is what the nutrient retaining capability of no-till soil is versus conventional till quantitatively. I mean, what percentage less you need in no-till versus the conventional till. And then from that, you can actually go out and maybe quantitate how much manure you're going to need in any given year to grow things. I mean, Iowa produces 73 billion pounds of manure every year. Seems to me that's a lot of manure.
One place to look, and you're right, so there's a lot of research being done on the hypoxia issue in the Gulf. One place to look, I think, for some of that stuff you just mentioned is the Chesapeake Bay area. They've been working on the Chesapeake now for probably about 2 or 3 decades. There's been a lot of really good research done on phosphorus, nitrogen management, different tillage systems. So Google Chesapeake Bay watershed, and I'll bet you'll be able to read for days on.
All right, we got a question over here first. He's been,
You spoke about putting wood chips, to filter
Oh, in the bioreactors? Yep.
bioreactors. I was, before you alluded to that, you said if the farmer is losing nitrates, it's not staying in soil and it's draining out to his tile. How is the farmer gonna know that he's losing the nitrates?
Right. That's where you have to do some edge of field monitoring, and some people are starting to do that, where you're basically collecting water samples from your tile outlet to see if you're losing anything or not. There's also another practice called drainage water management, where if you have the right kind of landscape, typically something fairly flat, some producers are actually putting in plugs where they'll stop their tile from flowing. You know, like during the winter months, so we're not just leaching any nitrates through the system. And then they will, you know, open them up after the crop is starting to suck up those nutrients. So they manage their water and nitrates accordingly.
John.
Thank you for mentioning the Chesapeake. My first cousin used to own land on the Chesapeake, and so it's always been fascinating with me. He's long gone now, but they've been fighting there for, like you said, 30 or 40 years, and they've largely eliminated animal agriculture and water culture. But the phosphorus and the nitrate levels haven't reduced in the bay. And so there was a story in the Washington Post this spring about going in and studying the E. coli bacteria, and they're genetically typing it to see where the bacteria is coming from. And they're finding it, and it's coming out of leaking municipal systems and from golf courses and from individual dwellings with improper septic tanks. And so the farmers who have been taking the brunt of the hit for the last 30 years were the guilty parties after all. While I'm up here, the second thing is, I'm a farmer and I tile. And we do sample our tile water to see what's coming out. Because I want to make sure that I'm not, nitrogen fertilizer is extremely expensive and you can't afford to waste it. So if I've got it in my tile line, I've got too much on for that application. And it's not hard to do it. Just gotta have a nice clean jug and a black tape.
Dan. Grant.
Thank you. Of all the things you're proposing, how many are A, actually required, and B, how many are actually regulated by the South Dakota DNR, which doesn't regulate much?
Okay. Yeah, and again, speaking for NRCS, again, we are not regulatory at all. We are 100% voluntary. We assist producers if they come to us wanting help with any of these conservation practices. DENR, I'm not going to speak for them. They do regulate the, you know, the CAFO operations, and they do have setback requirements and those sort of things in their permit. But beyond that, I guess I don't want to speak for DENR. So, but NRCS is not regulatory. We are voluntary.
I think in answer to that, the conditional use that the county would put on would be to have a nutrient management system. So it may not be required by the state, but it would be a conditional use.
If the county conditionally.
If the county puts it on like we have on the last 3 or 4.
No,
Actually, the lady in the blue right there, yes, ma'am. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we saw the little experiment, and we were seeing all this runoff off of the tilled soil. So if you're tilling your soil, you're gonna have runoff. So, I mean, and you can't force someone to do no-till, so.
Right. So what we try to do when we have, you know, we have workshops, we have producer meetings, we're trying to, again, educate, show producers maybe the economic benefits of using one system versus another, and that's all we can do from our standpoint. I mean,
You have to change your machinery. And that's a huge
Go ahead.
investment.
What was that, ma'am? I couldn't hear you. What did you say?
When you go from conventional to no-till, you have to change your machinery.
And also the you know, everybody think, oh, it's just an easy thing, we'll just switch. If you get a very, very wet spring and you have all this cover crop on, you will not raise a crop. You will not plant anything.
It delays your field entrance.
Because it stays so saturated. If any of you garden, and if you put on a layer of straw, which we actually use in our gardens too, The soil is great underneath there, but imagine trying to get a 8-ton tractor and planter out there trying to plant in the muck. It doesn't work.
Okay, well, let's go to him.
Okay, first I want to thank you for the presentation. It was great. The actual soil conservation with terraces and so forth wasn't new. I attended conservation camp as a kid and learned all that. And nutrient management is new, and I don't think we had that problem 50 years ago. So I really was impressed with that 10, that list of 10 nutrient management things. But now those are all voluntary, aren't they? There's no federal, state, or local regulations that require those.
Well, again, from an NRCS perspective, no, we don't regulate any of those. I guess, I'm not gonna speak again for the state or the counties, they may have their own regulations on some of those, but
Okay.
in our NRCS, which is a branch of USDA, we're 100% voluntary. We only work with producers that want us to help them.
Because I have a lot of, if we, in a normal spring, water will run through my property for 7 or 8 days and fill the road ditches. When we have a wet spring, I will have standing water till the middle of July. And that's all runoff from areas where manure is going to be spread. So you can see that I have somewhat of a concern about the health issues due to the toxins and pathogens in manure.
We have time for one more question.
Don had his hand up. Don had-
Let's go with Patty.
One thing you did not address was the salt in the feed and how it can poison your ground.
So one of the things we encourage producers when they're doing their manure testing is to actually do the sodium test or the salt test. So you can track that and see what your levels of salts are in your manure. And it's true, is depending on your rations and the species, you can get salt buildup if you're, again, or maybe over applying, so.
So you don't want to apply year after year.
All right, we're gonna go to the board. Don, you had a
I just would like to say that we have to remember that our egg producers are trying to make a living. And to do that, every practice doesn't necessarily work for them. They may not be able to afford to make a waterway. They may not be able to afford to plant a shelter belt or CRP. They may need, and some of them may over fertilize. They may put more nitrogen on, trying to get higher yields, trying to compete with a neighbor. There's a lot of pressure out there, especially right now, that agriculture is pretty much unprofitable. And I think they may not always place the highest decision on environmentally sound practices, but I'm not going to blame them or kick them for that, because they're going to lose it if they don't make a profit.
So profit over health.
No, sustainability.
It's a profit over
And to raise food that people want to buy at a low price.
I haven't seen all the people.
There's all kinds of 319 money, you know. I know Yankton County gets a grant for $10,000 to plant trees. I mean, there's all types of CRP programs, buffer strips. Even the state has a program now for tax reduction for buffer strips. So
How many CRP acres did you put in this year in Yankton County?
Oh, we planted 1,200 this year.
That's it.
600,000 or 800,000?
Yeah, however many.
But that doesn't
That was
include
only
like,
one year, though.
that doesn't
Well,
include buffer strips.
all right, we got 8:20. We finished the questions and side discussions we can have out in the lobby. I thank everybody for coming, because all these seminars, we're all learning something about our local environment and our local community. So with that, I would like to.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
I'll second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.